While harvesting his crops, farmer Stephen discovered a massive, strange ball half his size hidden among the produce. Its sudden appearance in his field was baffling. However, as Stephen inspected the ball, he realized its true identity, which sent him running for his life. When Stephen first spotted this strange ball in his field, he didn't think much of it. However, when he realized that it was ruining his crops, he was determined to find out what it was and how it got on his field. So he decided to break it open. He grabbed some tools and started chipping away. It took him a while, but when he finally saw what was inside this ball, he couldn't stop himself from screaming. He dropped everything from his hands and ran away as fast as he could. This was dangerous. What had he seen inside this ball, and why did it make him scream? And how did this ball even end up on his field in the first place? But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't. And hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Stephen smiled as he looked outside through his kitchen window. He was enjoying a nice cup of tea after lunch, and he stared at his fields, abundant with crops, ready to be harvested. Stephen took pride in the fact that he still did all of his work by himself. He was old enough to retire. He had been for years, but he didn't want to think about it. It was heavy work, that was true, but Stephen didn't mind. He enjoyed working outside and using his hands, and he got bored if he sat inside too long. His competitors were younger farmers about half his age who used the most advanced technology and therefore worked a lot faster. However, Stephen had simply decided not to worry about them. As long as he had his own customers and his crops were healthy, everything was fine. After Stephen finished his lunch, he gathered all of the tools that he needed for the harvest and headed out to the fields. However, when he got there, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. In the middle of his field, there was a huge ball about half his size. He carefully approached it to take a closer look at it, but he had no idea what it was. It kind of looked like a giant deformed pumpkin. Stephen, however, did not grow pumpkins. He decided that whatever this thing was, he needed to remove it off his fields. It was too heavy for him to pick up, so he needed to find another way to do it, and he took his time thinking of a plan. Farmer Stephen eventually decided he was going to roll the ball off of his field. With a deep breath, he braced himself against the sphere, feeling its odd texture beneath his palms. So he rolled up his sleeves and started pushing the ball, slowly rolling it away. At first it seemed impossible, but Stephen was no stranger to hard work. Stephen noticed that it was going well, and less heavy than it looked. He was glad about that. A sense of accomplishment began to fill him as he watched the ball roll further away from his precious crops. He quickly noticed that there was a strange smell coming from the ball. This made him even more confused, but he didn't think much of it. The scent was faintly chemical, out of place among the natural smells of earth and growth. Stephen wrinkled his nose and decided to ignore it. Stephen did not worry about the strange ball, and he continued to push and roll it away. He rolled it through his entire field until he finally came to the edge of the field where no crops were growing anymore. There, the ground sloped gently downwards, leading to a small, forgotten patch of land bordered by the dense thicket of woods that marked the edge of Stephen's property. Once Stephen had pushed the ball off his field, he simply left it there and continued his work in the field. The day's tasks were far from over, and Stephen threw himself back into the rhythm of his chores with the dedication of a man who knew no other way. Stephen had planned to roll the ball even further away from his field at the end of the day, but as the moment came, he was really too tired and he decided to leave it there overnight. As he lay down, he noticed his hands were itching slightly, probably from all the hard work, he thought. The next morning, everything seemed perfectly normal as he made his coffee and looked out over his fields from the kitchen window, yet the sight he saw hadn't been what he expected. Stephen immediately went outside to take a closer look. As he walked onto his fields, his eyes widened in shock at the sight before him. His eyes filled with tears as he stood next to them. The damage was extensive, more than he could have imagined. It felt like each withered plant was a direct blow to his heart. The fruits of his labor turned to dust. So many crops had died, and a part of the field was completely ruined. He couldn't understand how this had happened overnight. The ball, could it have been the cause? Kneeling among the rows, Stephen picked up a frail stem. "Nothing left to save," he said, half to himself, half to the wind, arms aching but determined. Stephen started clearing out the dead crops. "Can't let this spread," he grumbled as he worked, dragging the dead plants to a pile at the field's edge. Every so often he'd stop, wipe his brow, and look out over the surviving greens. "Gotta protect these guys," he spoke to the crops, hoping his efforts weren't in vain. After the field was cleared, he gazed towards where the ball lay, now even more suspicious than before. Walking the path he'd rolled the ball the previous day, Stephen's heart sank. Each patch of dead crops aligned perfectly with the ball's journey across his field. He remembered how the soil looked dead around it, confirming his fears. "You won't ruin me," he vowed, heading back to his shed with a plan forming in his mind. Stephen returned to the ball, his tools heavy in his hands but his resolve even heavier. Stephen struck the surface of the ball with the pickaxe. The sound of metal against the strange material rang out, sharp and loud in the quiet field. He hit again, harder this time, his actions fueled by a mix of fear and necessity. As Stephen raised the pickaxe again, a wave of doubt washed over him. What if it's dangerous? He paused, lowering the tool. Stephen made his way to his neighbors, explaining the situation and showing them pictures of the ball on his phone. "Ever seen anything like this?" he asked each of them. Their puzzled faces and negative replies didn't offer much comfort, but they all agreed to keep an eye out. Walking back to his farm, Stephen noticed his hands were itching worse than before, now with a burning sensation that made him wince. Once inside, Stephen headed straight for the sink, washing his hands under cold water, hoping to ease the itch and burn. After drying them, he found some lotion and applied it liberally. The lotion provided some temporary comfort. After a moment of thought, Stephen went to the shed and grabbed a pair of sturdy gloves. "Not taking any more chances," he said to himself, pulling them on. "Let's get to the bottom of this," he declared, heading back to the mysterious ball. He began striking the ball, each hit echoing his frustration. The sound of metal against the strange material filled the air, a testament to his determination to uncover the truth behind the destruction of his livelihood. With every strike, a peculiar odor grew stronger, wafting through the air. Continuing his assault on the ball, Stephen didn't realize its true nature until it was too late. With one final, forceful strike, the ball cracked open. The realization of what he had been hitting, of what had been hiding inside, hit him a split second too late. As the ball split open, Stephen recoiled in horror. Countless dead bugs and insects spilled out, covering the ground around him. "Oh no!" he exclaimed, a scream escaping his lips as he stumbled backwards. The sight was too much. Stephen bolted to his house, slamming the door behind him as he headed straight for the bathroom. Stephen scrubbed his body thoroughly, paying extra attention to his hands, which still burned and itched intensely. "Gotta get it all off," he muttered to himself, his skin reddening under the hot water and rough washcloth. The burning sensation seemed to fade a bit with each scrub, giving him a small sense of relief amidst the chaos. After the shower, Stephen dressed in clean clothes and sat heavily on his bed, his mind racing. Someone did this on purpose, he concluded, piecing together the events. "I'm going to find out who did this," he vowed, a fire kindling within him. Armed with a new sense of caution, Stephen donned a thick worker's suit and pulled on heavy gloves before venturing back out to his fields. Once he reached the remnants of the ball, Stephen carefully gathered every piece, sealing them into a heavy-duty bag. He carried the bag back to his shed, placing it far from any sunlight and potential prying eyes. "Out of sight for now," he murmured, securing the shed door behind him. It felt like a temporary solution, but necessary until he could figure out the next steps. Reaching out to his network of farming friends proved more fruitful this time. After several conversations and a few pointed questions, it came to light that Joshua, one of his competitors, might be involved. "Joshua made that ball," one friend confided after some hesitation. Joshua's farm bordered Stephen's, and it was no secret that Joshua's business had been struggling. Despite their proximity and shared profession, there was an unspoken rivalry that had never before boiled over into malice. Stephen thought back to their interactions, trying to reconcile the helpful neighbor with the desperate competitor who might resort to sabotage. Stephen couldn't believe it, especially as he had talked to him before. Earlier that day, Stephen had confronted Joshua, needing to hear the truth from him directly. "I didn't do anything with that ball, Stephen. I swear, I've never seen it before." Joshua's voice was firm, his eyes steady. Despite the evidence, there was a part of Stephen that wanted to believe him, torn between the instincts of a neighbor and the suspicions of a victim. That had been a lie. Joshua had indeed crafted the ball himself, disguising it to blend seamlessly with the crops. Inside, he had filled it with a potent poison, calculated to kill any plant it touched. Stephen pieced together the truth from clues and whispers among the community. Without confronting Joshua again, Stephen took a drastic step. Under the cover of dusk, he scattered the pieces of the toxic ball across Joshua's fields. Each fragment was a seed of destruction, sown with a heavy heart but firm resolve. "If my fields suffer, so will his," Stephen thought grimly, the weight of his actions heavy on his shoulders. The next morning, the devastation was apparent. Joshua's fields, once vibrant and thriving, were now a landscape of death. As the sun rose, revealing the extent of the damage, Joshua's despair was palpable. There was no saving the crops. It was too late. The poison had done its work, more thoroughly and quickly than even Stephen had anticipated. Furious, Joshua confronted Stephen, his face contorted with anger. "You need to pay for this, Stephen! What have you done?" he demanded, his voice thick with accusation. Stephen met his gaze with feigned ignorance, shrugging lightly. "I really don't know what you're talking about, Joshua," he said coolly, maintaining his composure. Inside, however, his conscience wrestled with the morality of his actions. Luckily, the other farmers were disgusted by Joshua's actions. They rallied around Stephen, offering not just their sympathy but also their support. To help Stephen recover from the loss, his fellow farmers lent him some of their modern machinery. These tools were a far cry from what Stephen was used to, featuring the latest technology in farming. With these machines, he could harvest and plant much faster, helping him to quickly make up for the lost crops and potentially save his season. The efficiency of the modern machinery, combined with his hard-earned farming skills, proved to be a successful mix. "Couldn't have done it without you all," he often said, heartfelt gratitude coloring his words. Meanwhile, Joshua's situation worsened. With no way to save his crops or restore his farm to its former glory, he was forced to make a tough decision. Eventually, he sold his farm, leaving the community he had once been a part of. The land was passed on to others who hoped to cleanse it of the past and start anew. Stephen continued to work his farm with joy and dedication for a few more years, buoyed by the support of his community and the success he had managed to maintain. When he finally decided to retire, it was with a sense of fulfillment and pride. He left his farm in capable hands, content that he had overcome the challenges and ended his career on a high note.